Welcome, Minister McCallum and the department officials. Over the last few years, we've watched the horrors of the Syrian civil war unfold and the consequent waves of hundreds of thousands of refugees. And perhaps the image that's most seared in Canadian minds is that of the body of baby Alan Kurdi washing ashore after his family's unsuccessful attempt to find peace and security outside of Syria. And Minister, in your mandate letter, it says Canadians are open, accepting, and generous. And over the last few months, we have seen Canadians open up their hearts, open up their homes to tens of thousands of Syrian refugees. And I know, Minister, this has been a challenging time for yourself and, of course, the department officials. In fact, you've met those challenges in a, some would say, miraculous way. However, the mandate letter also says that you are to report regularly on your progress towards fulfilling our government's commitments and to have meaningful engagement with parliamentary committees. So we're very appreciative of the fact that you so expeditiously responded to the committee's request that you appear before us. And pursuant to the motion adopted by the committee on February 16, 2016, to appear before the Committee on Citizenship and Immigration at your earliest convenience, the Minister is here today, this February 23, 2016, to discuss the ministerial mandate letter. I would now invite the Minister to proceed with any opening comments that he may have. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Je suis très content d'être ici.
I'm very pleased to be here as the Minister of Immigration. In fact, this is the first time that this is a Minister of Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees who is appearing before a committee, because the word refugees was added to the title by the Prime Minister.
Sir, added the word refugees to my title because it signals a strong support and respect for refugees and the role they play in our country, as I think can be seen by the actions we have taken to date. I'm pleased as well to introduce two of our Assistant Deputy Ministers on each side of me, Don Edlund and Katrina Tapley. And I would like to make a fairly brief presentation and then be open to questions. And I think perhaps, as the Chair indicated, the first thing to talk about perhaps is the Syrian refugees. I'm an economist and have typically been involved in dollars and cents issues, one might say, but this is more a matter of the heart, a matter to define who we as Canadians are. And I think that message has gone out. I think Canadians have responded very warmly. And as I have said many times, this is seen, I see this as a national project, not a federal government project. And we have seen the response of Canadians from all walks of life across the country. And I think our message has also gone out around the world. The photograph of the Prime Minister meeting the first plane really did go around the world, to the point where when I was in Jordan visiting a UNICEF center with little children there who knew nothing about Canada and were not applying to come here, they told me they heard that our Prime Minister met the Syrians in Toronto a few days ago. So if little refugee children in Jordan knew about it, I think many people around the world did. And I can also say we are making good progress. As of February 21st, 23,098 Syrian refugees have landed. So I think it's safe to say that we're well on track to hit our 25,000 commitment by the end of this month. But after that, or indeed all the time, I would say, the major challenge has been not so much to transport the people from there to here, as it is to settle them well in Canada. And that is and has been our major challenge. and nothing of this nature goes perfectly smoothly. There are always hiccups along the way, but I think it is going well in terms of helping the refugees find housing, learn English or French, get jobs, and settle down as regular Canadians, just as has been the case with previous waves of refugees in our history. Et comme a dit le président, j'ai été
As the chair said, I've been open throughout this process. I explained to the media the positive points and the negative points of this project. When we had problems with exit visas or other problems, I mentioned those.
Go together on this trip with Canadians. If it's a national project, I think Canadians should know the ups and the downs along the way. And so I hope I've been open with Canadians on that, as I think I am being open with you today. So the idea was for me to talk about what's in my mandate letter. Excuse me, I won't talk about everything in the mandate letter. I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have. But I'd like to just describe a few points. Some of the things in the mandate letter are pretty simple to do. It's like black or white, on or off. You turn off a switch or you turn on a switch. So for example, refugee health care, well, we have reestablished that to the point where it's the same now as it was in 2012. We've also added additional benefits in terms of payment for medical exams overseas and inoculations, which are good for the refugees and good for Canada's public health. So that's done. The Citizenship Act we will do in coming days, and as we have said many times, we believe there should be one tier, not two tiers of Canadian citizenship, and a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, and so certainly that central aspect of this bill will become evident very soon. But there's one element in my mandate letter which is much more complicated, much more difficult to achieve and more time-consuming. It's not just turning something on or turning something off. And that has to do with improving the processing times for family class immigrants. And to me, if I had to say what's my number one priority, that would have to be it. Because over the last 10 years, the processing times for virtually every class of newcomer, with the exception of economic immigrants, has mushroomed, has escalated to the point where I think it is unacceptable for Canada to ask spouses to wait typically 24 months before they are reunited versus waiting periods like 6 to 8 months for other countries with which we compare ourselves, like UK, US, Australia. So for not just for spouses, but for family class in general, my top priority is to bring down these processing times quickly, and we will have targets for this, which we will post, and we will work extremely hard to achieve those targets. And so we had an ambitious target of 25,000 for Syrian refugees. We will have an equally ambitious target to reduce the processing times over coming years for family class immigrants. And so the committee is master of its own work. Ministers certainly don't tell you what to do, but I would suggest that you might want to look at this whole process of high levels of processing times and how we will achieve reductions. Because I'm working on this on what one might say are 3 fronts. First, I'm talking to you, and you may or may not decide to do a study to be a part of this effort. Second, I'll be having a retreat with the senior members of the officials of my department, plus a political staff, to brainstorm on this, to work towards setting goals, to work towards doing our processes radically differently and faster and more efficiently in order to achieve objectives, and before too long to set objectives for bringing down those processing times. And the third front is I will be announcing relatively soon an external advisory group of experts who will also help to achieve this radical reduction in processing times for family class immigrants. So at least in terms of my department working closely together with me and with my staff to achieve this, plus this external group, plus, if it is your desire, your own work in this area, if we can work on these three fronts, I think we can achieve a meaningful progress in the not-too-distant future. Je pense, Monsieur le Président, que
Mr. Chair, I think that's enough for me as far as my opening comments go. So I'd be very happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. And pursuant to routine motion adopted by the committee on February 16th of 2016, we'll now proceed to rounds of questions, beginning with 7 minutes for the Liberal Party. Mr. Sarai, the floor is yours.
Welcome, Minister. Thank you for taking the time out to appear today before our committee. As you know, Surrey Centre welcomes up to 40% of all refugees that come into the lower mainland of British Columbia. We have learned through the media that the previous Conservative was slow to roll out its response to the crisis in Syria. Incredibly, we learned that there were some reports that the government handpicked refugees before allowing them entry into Canada. Minister, my constituents and others across the country are alarmed to hear that in 2015, refugees were chosen not based on vulnerability or need, but rather which faith group or ethnic group they came from. Minister, are you able to speak to this and confirm if this was true?
Well, thank you for that question. And you mentioned Lower Mainland. I would congratulate you and the Surrey community for all the work you have done, and the Sikh community in particular. I was out there early on, and they are one of the communities that came forward in a really strong way to support this initiative. We're kind of into sunny ways, so I'm not dwelling on the acts of our predecessors. I mean, I talked about the mushrooming processing times over the last decade, without saying which government was in power over the last decade. And so I'm not wanting to dwell too much on, whose fault it was, why we are where we are. I will say it's not the fault of the public servants in the department who were faced with declining budgets and a reallocation of resources away from family class. And in terms of handpicking refugees, that may or may not be the case. I'm not focusing on that myself. I'll tell you what our policy is, and that is that we take the refugees from the United Nations, the list of vulnerable people defined as vulnerable according to the United Nations, and we invite people from those lists, and that is totally irrespective of religion and other characteristics. So we are religion neutral, shall we say, in terms of our selection of refugees. I think that the previous government had a different view, but I have not looked into that in any detail. I'm more focused on moving forward.
Thank you. Follow-up to that, it looks as though we're on track to hit our government's goal. As you had said, 24,000 have already arrived, and we're almost there to the target of 25,000. Communities across Canada have responded overwhelmingly to help these new Canadians. But these new immigrants are eager to start their lives and want to contribute to Canadian society, but are somewhat challenged when it comes to language and job training. However, there is some concern on how we can ensure that they are integrated into communities such as Surrey Centre. Minister, are you able to elaborate the government's efforts to facilitate the integration and language training for these new Canadians?
Yes. As I said, although the media attention was often, at least for a time, on how many we would get here in what period of time, the main challenge has always been not that issue, but how well we will receive them and welcome them and integrate them so that they, like other refugees from other countries in the past, will as quickly as possible become fully functioning Canadians or permanent residents with a job and a family and everything else. But the government-assisted refugees, as I said, are particularly vulnerable. The typical government-assisted refugee from Syria speaks not a word of English or French, often has not much education, frequently has not been on an airplane until they came here. And so for them, they're in a brand new, totally different environment. And unlike the privately sponsored refugees, they typically don't know a soul in Canada. And so they're on their own in that sense. And so we have to make sure that they're not on their own, that we in Canada, and not just the federal government, as I said, it's not a federal project, but at the settlement level, it's at least as much provincial governments, settlement agencies, and others are there to help them get the housing, get the language training, and get the jobs. And I have been doing many things to try to promote that process on each of those three fronts. And I think in particular on the language training, I think we have some additional funding which we can provide on language training, because that's a sine qua non. And I know in some parts of the country, notably I believe British Columbia, there is a shortage there, there are some bottlenecks there, and I hope to be able to address those.
Brief question and a brief answer. Thank you.
Sure. I'll be quick. On top of the priorities given to you by the Prime Minister is to develop a plan to address the ballooning processing times for citizenship. As you know, hundreds and perhaps thousands in my riding have been waiting years in queues for their applications to be processed. Now we have just learned from the Treasury Board and the Parliamentary Budget Officer that previous Conservative governments had made cuts to many of the departmental programs that dealt with applications. Are you able to tell this committee on what the effects of those cuts by stealth have had on applications of spouses, parents, and live-in caregivers?
Well, as I say, I'm trying to look forward more than backwards, but it is certainly a fact that the budgets of the department, particularly in family class, were cut, and that this is one of the reasons that the processing times have gone as high as they have. But I think my job is to look more forwards and less backwards, and we start from where we are for whatever reason. We have the hand that we were dealt, and we have to play that hand to the best of our ability. And so that is why I'm hoping to have this 2- or 3-part process through the external committee, through my department, and possibly through this committee, to work as hard as we can to bring those processing times down as quickly as possible. Partly it will involve more money. We have committed more money in our platform, but in large measure, it should be up to us as a department to improve the efficiency of our processes to achieve those ends.
Thank you, Minister. I will now proceed to the Conservative Party. Ms. Rumpel, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comments relate to the Minister's mandate letter under the section of leading government-wide efforts to resettle 25,000 refugees from Syria in the coming months. Earlier this year, the government made a decision to waive the immigration loan program repayment requirement for Syrian refugees. The Minister's Parliamentary Secretary is on the record saying that the government is treating Syrian refugees differently than other cohorts. Questions have been raised as to what criteria are being used to define when the government treats one class of refugees different than another, which raises an interesting question. under subsection 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, it says that every individual before and under the law has the right to equal protection of the law without discrimination, and in particular without discrimination based on race, national, ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or physical disability. And subsection 15.2 of the Charter talks about how this particular section doesn't preclude any law, program, or activity that has as its object, and it goes on and so forth. And the case law on this is very interesting. But what I find interesting about subsection 15.2 is that how would you apply the test of the Charter to two different cohorts or multiple different cohorts of refugees from around the world that are seeking refuge in Canada? Arguably, they all are disadvantaged per the reading of subsection 15.2. So as the minister is, I also have a background in economics. I'm not a lawyer. But I think this is a very interesting question. I think that this is a question not only for the fairness. I know my colleague from Surrey just asked questions. We've had questions from Surrey Council with regard to this program. But we also have the budget coming up, and I think that this is an important question in terms of overall costing of the government's program. So given that I think that this is a very interesting area of study, Mr. Chair, I move that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee study the government's recent decision to waive the immigration loan program's repayment requirement for Syrian refugees, that the committee examine whether waiving this requirement for Syrian refugees and not other refugee cohorts constitutes a violation of Section 15 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, and that this study be comprised of no less than 4 meetings to be held prior to May 1st, 2016, and that the committee report its findings to the House.
Ms. Rumpel, would it be possible to request that we defer this debate around this motion to committee business?
I realize that that portion of the meeting is in camera, and I think that this is a very important question to raise in public today, and that's why I've moved it.
Would you entertain that a portion of our in-camera meeting be in public in the afternoon, so that the minister is here for a limited time, 1 hour, and I know that many of the committee members would like the opportunity to have the minister answer questions of tremendous significance, as is yours, but perhaps we could consider discussing your motion in public during the second hour when the minister is no longer here, so that we don't cut into this opportunity of all committee members to ask questions of the minister.
Perhaps we could just extend the minister's time here by 15 minutes to accommodate this discussion right now, since I've moved the motion.
Minister, are you able to remain for an additional 15 minutes today along with your department officials?
Yes.
So the motion is in order. Is there a second? Yes, Ms. Kwan?
You need a seconder for the motion? I'll second it.
No, we do not.
And if you don't need one, I'll speak to the motion, Mr. Chair. I would gladly speak in support of the motion. I do think that it's a relevant motion, an important motion. Nonetheless, I too was interested in asking the minister a question about whether or not his government or himself has reached a conclusion regarding the waiving of the transportation and medical costs for all refugees. The government made the decision for Syrian refugees who arrive before November 4th to be able to have that cost waived. But any refugee from Syria arriving after November 4th would not have the cost waived, and that's caused incredible hardships for some families. I myself have met with families who have came forward, and 8 months they've been here, and they're on income assistance on the rate. They get $1,400 a month, $950 goes to their rent, and they get $450 left. They're getting a bill each month for over $600 for their transportation and medical costs related. There is so much stress for the family that is unbelievable, and we're creating a two-tier system. And I would argue not for just Syrian refugees, but for all refugees as well. I would certainly hope that the government would move on this. And the minister actually said on November the 19th that the government was considering it. And perhaps there's an update. Maybe the motion may not be as relevant if the government and the minister can confirm today that, in fact, they have actually arrived at a decision with regards to that. But without that decision, I do think that this is a very important motion and a relevant motion, and I would be very happy to support the motion and the work that needs to be done around it.
Minister, there was a question from Ms. Kwan. Would you like to respond to that, or should we proceed with further discussion?
If you wish, I could
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
To
point of order.
Could I have a ruling from yourself and the clerk on the ability for witnesses before committee to comment on motions that are before the committee?
I've been advised that as a member of Parliament, the minister can comment and respond.
In that case, Mr. Chair, I would like to say, in a sense, I find it heartwarming that a member of the Conservative Party would invoke the Charter. So I congratulate the Conservative Party on that commitment to the Charter. But I would also make the point that we do not believe that our actions have in any way violated the Charter. Section 15 of the Charter prohibits discrimination based on specific characteristics, e.g. race, national or ethnic origin, that are markers of vulnerability to prejudice or disadvantage. When the government introduces a new measure that is beneficial to a particular group, this distinction does not necessarily amount to discrimination within the meaning of Section 15. In addition, Section 15(2) of the Charter allows the government to undertake or introduce ameliorative programs for disadvantaged groups. So in other words, distinctions in treatment do not amount to discrimination. And so while I congratulate the Conservative Party for its newfound commitment to the Charter, I would argue that in this particular case, the actions of the government do not constitute a violation of the Charter.
Mr. Sarai.
I would move that the motion be revised to state that we study the federal loan program going forward, and as well in how we can assist those that are participants in the loan program as of now, but not based on a charter issue. And that was the specific request of the two city councilors from the city of Surrey, which was to study the refugee transportation loan program as a topic for the subcommittee.
Ms. Rempel.
Speaking to the amendment, I don't support the amendment because the original form and substance of the first motion was to deal specifically with a potential charter violation related to the government's handling of the immigration loans repayment program. I appreciate that the minister may decide to comment on his government's interpretation of the charter in this situation, but I think it behooves all committee members to remember that the committee is a master of its own destiny, and as such, we are entrusted to take on studies that can look at anything that we want. I think that this is a very interesting question, one that can't be resolved by a simple wave of the hand by a minister at the table, because when we're looking at applying this particular program to different cohorts of refugees, I think it would be very interesting to hear from immigration experts, legal experts from across the country, when we talk about the amelioration of conditions of disadvantaged individuals, as the minister raised, or groups that are disadvantaged because of race, national, ethnic origin, et cetera, how it constitutes, whether or not a charter violation is constituted when the government has not clearly stated its criteria for applying this in this particular situation. So I don't accept the amendment. I think it's a way of the government trying to avoid a very interesting question. I appreciate my colleagues' support from the NDP, and there have been questions on whether or not this particular decision creates two classes of refugees, It's potentially precedent setting in terms of how Canada's immigration system goes forward. And I think that if there's anything that the Immigration Committee should be doing is looking at whether or not a government program is actually, and a decision is violating the Charter from the perspective of setting precedent going forward. I think that the motion as it's worded right now asks a very pertinent question, and its report could actually have an impact on how Parliament functions. So with that, I do not support the amendment, and I strongly hope that my colleagues opposite would support the motion as it has been presented.
Ms. Kwan.
Much. I had put a question to the minister, which I thought he was going to answer, which might help inform this debate, and that is on the question about if the government's made a decision on providing and waiving the cost for all refugees, whether they're Syrian refugees who's arrived before November 4th or after, or those who are from other country. If we have an answer from the minister on that, that would very much, I think, inform our motion going forward.
Minister?
The short answer is we do not yet have a decision on that. We are looking into it. There are costs associated with it, but we are actively engaged in looking into that very question.
Ms. Stubbs?
I just concur with my colleague that this is an urgent and important subject for the committee to discuss and to debate. I think all of us, as we welcome refugees to the Canadian family, want to ensure that there is equality in our services and our support for people coming to our country. And it seems to go to the very heart of what it means to be Canadian and to the foundation of our system. So I just encourage the committee members to engage in the debate of this motion.
Thank you. Ms. Kwan?
Thank you. Again, to inform our debate, I'm wondering if the minister would have a time frame of when his government would arrive at a decision. And when he says there are costs associated with it, I wonder if he has information on how many refugees are impacted that are pre-November 14th that are Syrian refugees and those who are from other countries. If we have a bold general number of how many people are we talking about, and again, I think that would inform us in our debate as well on this motion.
Minister?
I don't have these numbers with me, but I will do my best to get them to you. And when I'm talking about the costs, if we eliminate the refugee loan program and that from now on the government pays the airfares for all refugees coming to Canada, then it's not just a matter of this particular situation with the pre-November 4th people or the non-Syrian people today. We're talking about changing a program that has been in effect since 1951, eliminating it, so that would be an ongoing cost going forward. And so, as I said, we are examining that actively. It's a question of whether we have the funding to eliminate this travel loan program, or whether we would want to use such funds for other purposes. But it's something I can tell you that is under active investigation.
Thank you. Mr. Chen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm quite supportive of the amendment, and I do not support the original motion. I'm rather content with the answer I heard from the minister, that with respect to achieving equality, different groups are treated differently, and with respect to differential treatment, the government is looking at ways it can move forward based on the resources that are available. I do believe that as a committee, it's not our role to reach conclusions of law around how the equality provisions of the Charter are being applied. That is, to me, a role of the courts. But I do appreciate the conversation. I'm satisfied with what I heard from the minister.
Mr. Sarai?
I move that we have the minister's valuable time, and I think I move to adjourn this debate to later. I think it's been more than 15 minutes, and we're eating into the minister's time, and I believe even the members of Her Royal Majesty's opposition and the other parties have pertinent questions that we should utilize this time for now. So I move that the debate on this new motion and the amendment be adjourned.
Ms. Rempel.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I don't believe that you can move a motion to adjourn debate on a motion in committee, only to adjourn committee. And I'm just wondering if my colleague is in fact moving a dilatory motion to adjourn committee while the minister is sitting here.
Ms. Rempel, I'm advised that the motion is out of order, so we will continue. Mr. Sarai.
I believe, as Mr. Chan has stated, that the debate on the charter is not, I think, with the purview of this committee. I believe if it is, charter issues should be studied by the Justice Committee and others, and this should be more on the programs itself. And I think the amendment should prevail. And again, I suggest we adjourn this motion, not the committee itself, but this motion to a later time.
Ms. Kwan.
I move to table.
Oh, sorry. It's not
I didn't hear.
at the end, did you
Move to table this for, I guess, a vote to adjourn this motion?
that is not in order. Okay. That motion is not in order. Ms. Kwan.
Okay, let's try this on for size in the spirit of the sunny ways. It appears to me that what we can do is to address both concerns, and that is to say, my colleague Ms. Rumpel's motion speaks to needing to understand the legality of a current policy that's in place, and in that context, to operate, for government to operate, and therefore the committee is working going forward to examine that question. If we're able to set that question aside with a legal opinion, that would assist us in our working going forward, and that then will bring us to the next phase of the work that needs to be done, and that is to say, what information do we need to gather to support the government in moving forward in addressing this critical issue that, in my personal opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, that the policy as it stands right now and its application of only applying it to one group of refugees based on a timeline, it creates a two-tier system. Refugees by nature, the very definition of who they are and when they apply for the program speaks to the urgency and the great need that they have to flee their country. That situation applies to every single refugee, no matter when they arrive and from what country. And I think that is a critical issue that we need to examine and to ensure that the principle of fairness is applied to everyone. I think I heard in the House of Commons yesterday from a member who says there's nothing more important for all members of this House, and that is to apply the principle of fairness in the work that we do. And so in the spirit of the sunny ways, I wonder whether or not we can move in the direction of having this committee deploy its resources to get a legal opinion on this question, and then once we have that information, we will also then be able to go forward with that work. So that would be my suggestion of friendly amendments.
Ms. Rempel.
To issue.
And I caution that we are rapidly approaching the 15 minutes.
Great. I'll address my colleague, Mr. Sarai's comments or concern about mandate, the committee mandate. Actually, the Standing Committee for Citizenship and Immigration has the power to, and in its mandate, it's written, study issues of its own choosing. And under the list of what may be done under that, statute law relating to CIC, other matters relating to the mandate, management, organization, or operation of CIC. So in terms of the argument that this does not fall within the committee mandate, it's actually right in there. I think it's pretty obvious that this motion falls in there. With regard to the comment, my colleague from the NDP, I appreciate her comments and her support on this. With regard to the request for a legal opinion, I actually think that that was the objective of the motion as it's been written right now. I think it would be very interesting, and I'd love to work collaboratively with my colleagues across the table to bring in legal experts to talk about whether or not this would in fact constitute a charter violation. I think that that's very timely as well. I know there was concerns raised with regard to budget. The minister raised concerns about the budget. This type of a ruling would actually help the minister, or a report would actually help the minister decide whether or not the program should stay as it has been for the last 30 years or change in the context of the government's upcoming budget, which I know there's a lot of requests for funding in there. And then with regard to some of the other components, my colleague from the NDP did ask the minister a question with regard to whether or not she would support the motion if there has been a decision made on this. The minister clearly said that there hasn't, but more concerning, he said that he didn't know the numbers of people affected. So I think that these are all points that could be studied within the scope of the motion as presented. So just to reiterate,
Ms.
if my colleague...
we're being very flexible. We're now approaching 17 minutes.
Thank you.
17 minutes.
Mr. Chair, just as a point of order, I do have the ability to continue speaking when I do have the floor at committee. But just to continue on that, and I am closing, I do support the motion as it's put forward. It's not meant to be, I think it's a very important question, and it's one that the government has not been able to answer. I hope that my colleagues support it. I don't support the motion as amended, and I certainly hope that my colleagues, if they would like to look at changing the date, perhaps moving it to June, I'd be okay with that. But I do think it's a motion of great importance, and I hope that my colleagues will support it.
Thank you. So we're moving to a vote on the sub-amendment.
Mr. Chair, I call for a recorded division on this as well.
Okay, so you have 3 steps. So you have the sub-amendment. So we begin with the sub-amendment from Ms. Kwan, and the sub-amendment reads, and that a legal opinion be sought as to whether waiving this requirement for Syrian refugees constitutes a violation of Section 15 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Oh, Ms. Kwan?
Just to clarify, that would be a written legal opinion. Which might help expedite the work that we're doing. And then once we have that legal opinion, then we can move forward to the other amendment. So.
Thank you for that clarification.
So just to clarify, if my colleague could clarify, the sub-amendment that she's proposing, it's to the amendment proposed by the Liberals, so that the Liberal motion would stand with her sub-amendment being attached to it.
Correct.
So that actually wouldn't change the form and substance, except that we wouldn't be allowed, in the scope of the study, witnesses to talk about the charter violation. So that I can't support it.
I was trying to...
Yeah. Okay.
So we will proceed to vote.
Mr. Chair, I was wondering if I could propose a 3-minute recess before we all decide where we stand on the amendments and the sub-amendments.
I believe that I've technically begun the vote, so we will proceed with the vote on the sub-amendment. That's a recorded vote.
Yep.
Okay.
On the sub-amendment of Ms. Kwan, please answer yay or nay. Mr. Chen.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I was expecting that the motion would be read out again. Could that be read out? And given the context of it being an amendment to another amendment, I would like the other amendment also read out, please.
You can read the whole thing.
Okay. Yes. So I'll read the original motion the amendment, and then the sub-amendment for everyone's clarity. So the original motion is that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee study the government's recent decision to waive the immigration loans program repayment requirement for Syrian refugees, that the committee examine whether waiving this requirement for Syrian refugees and not other refugee cohorts constitutes a violation of Section 15 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that this study be comprised of no less than 4 meetings to be held prior to May 1st, 2016, and the committee report its findings to the House. The amendment reads that pursuant to SO 1082, the committee studied the government's recent decision to waive the immigration loans program repayment requirement for Syrian refugees, and going forward, that the transportation loans program be studied as it relates to all refugees, and that a written refugees. Now, the sub-amendment is, and that a written legal opinion be sought as to whether waiving this requirement for Syrian refugees constitutes a violation of Section 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So we will now proceed to the vote.
Nay. Mr. Asasi?
Well, my understanding is that the legal opinion, which is noted...
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, it's yay or nay, Mr. Asasi.
Nay.
Mr. Sarai?
Nay.
Mr. Tabara?
Nay.
Ms. Zahid?
Nay.
Ms. Rampel? Mr. Soroya?
Yes.
Ms. Stubbs?
Yay.
Ms. Kwan?
Yay.
The sub-amendment is defeated.
The sub-amendment is defeated. We will now proceed to vote on the amendment.
Mr. Chen?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Can I have some clarity on whether this amendment replaces the original motion, or does it add an extra part to it?
It replaces, I believe you may have a copy before you, but if you don't, it replaces the portion that reads that the committee examine whether waiving this requirement for Syrian refugees, not other refugee cohorts, constitutes a violation of Section 15 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that this study be comprised of no less than 4 meetings to be held prior to May 1st, 2016, and the committee report its findings to the House. So should this amendment pass, the motion would then read that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee studied the government's recent decision to waive the immigration loans program repayment requirement for Syrian refugees, that pursuant to SO 1082, the committee studied the government's recent decision to waive the immigration loans program repayment requirement for Syrian refugees, and going forward, that the transportation loans program be studied as it relates to all refugees.
Mr. Chen?
In favor?
Mr. Asasi?
In favor.
Mr. Sarai?
In favor.
Mr. Tabara?
In favor.
Ms. Zahid?
In favor.
Ms. Rampel?
Nay.
Mr. Soroya?
Nay.
Ms. Stubbs?
Nay.
Ms. Kwan?
Yay.
Pardon?
Yay.
The amendment passes.
The amendment has passed. And we will now vote on the main motion as amended.
Mr. Chen?
In favor? Not in favor.
Mr. Asasi?
Not in favor.
Mr. Sarai?
Not in favor.
Mr. Tabara?
Nay.
Ms. Zahid?
Not in favor.
Ms. Rempel?
Yay.
Mr. Soroya?
In favor.
Ms. Stubbs?
Yay.
Ms. Kwan?
Yay.
That motion is defeated.
The motion is defeated.
Ms. Kwan
Point of
Ms.
order.
Kwan,
Point
yes?
of order, Mr. Chair. You know, We have an agenda here. We've invited the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship to appear before this committee. It was the will of this committee, as we decided at our last meeting, to invite the Minister so that we could hear what the government is doing, and that would help inform our agenda as a committee moving forward. I'm rather disappointed to see this continuation of motions.
Mr. Chen, this is not it's not a point of order, and we are returning to the committee business as it was in the agenda. Ms. Kwan, you have you have 4 minutes 37 seconds remaining.
Okay, then I'm going to plow through my questions very quickly. My first question is related to Bill C-24. The minister will recall that during the campaign, the Prime Minister announced in the Tsingtao, Mingpao, and World Journal media in the Lower Mainland of Vancouver that he would repeal Bill C-24 should he form government. And so my quick question is, will the government act accordingly and repeal the entire Bill C-24? I'm going to ask my questions very quickly, and I'll let the minister answer them all at once. My next question would be on the legacy files. When the Conservative government's Balanced Refugee Reform Act came into effect in December 2012, it created a two-tier system for refugee claimants that applied under the old laws before 2012 and the new claimants in terms of the time for them to process the application. Now, more than 3 years have passed. Claimants under the old legislation are still waiting to receive a verdict, whereas new claimants receive a decision after only a few months. And according to the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada, all legacy files, as we call them, should be finalized by 2018. So my question to the minister is, will there be change in addressing this? And if not, why are refugee claimants from 2012, which are now integrated into Canadian society, still waiting for a decision on whether or not they can stay in Canada, and when last year's claimants already know their fate and can breathe easily? If there would be a change, and I wonder if the minister can advise, when can we see that change take place? My next question deals with the resettlement services. The minister and his staff at a technical briefing on February the 3rd, 2016, the official actually said that Syrian refugees who arrived here would not have to wait more than 2 weeks to be permanently settled. I've met many families who've waited more than 2 weeks, and they're still waiting. Some of them have missed appointments with immigration officials because the officials just simply didn't show up 3 weeks after they've been here. And so my question to the minister is this: how many immigration officers does he have working on the ground to process the applicants, the new arrivals, and how many settlement workers are on the ground in each of the cities in providing resettlement services to the refugees?
Okay, there are a number of questions there. I might just mention in response to an earlier question that the number of refugees pre-November 4th is approximately 3,000. So that's a partial answer to the earlier question of Syrians, that is. And we will endeavor to get the rest of the answer soon. In terms of Bill C-24, this will be coming soon, and we will make very major amendments as we committed to in the election. We like one or two things in C-24, like the Lost Canadians provision, so we would not want to repeal that element of it, but we will certainly honor our campaign commitments. In terms of the settlement of refugees, I don't have exactly how many settlement workers there are in every community across the country, but I can tell you that those settlement agencies are working extremely hard to get the job done, and that we are also expanding the number of cities that are settlement communities to Victoria and other places to be announced very soon. So a lot of effort is underway on the part of all of those on the part of all of those cities and settlement agencies. And I can say on the other issue that I can also say on the settlement issue that we have recently acquired numbers, and 52% of refugees that have arrived from Syria so far have proceeded to permanent housing. So that is a precise number which my department only recently obtained, so that will give you an additional piece of information. And finally, on your question on IRB, that they have received funding to reduce their legacy cases, and they continue to work on those legacy cases as well as new ones that are coming before them.
Ms. Kwan.
Up on the legacy file, the reduced workforce had actually a significant impact. So when the minister says that they have received funding, is the timeline for that funding still going to be then 2018 for all these files to be processed, or is that going to expedite it? On the Syrian refugees file, the minister doesn't have the numbers on how many workers. I wonder if he has the information on what is the average timeline for a new arrival to see an immigration officer, and then second to that, to see a resettlement worker to help them find permanent housing.
Well, they certainly see immigration workers on arrival at the airport in Toronto or Montreal, and the question of the funding of IRB is something, in terms of going forward, is something we are now currently considering in the lead up to the budget.
In terms of the resettlement piece, actually, yes, they see them at the airport, but I'm talking about the subsequent meeting where they actually get the additional information to move into the resettlement phase.
They are moved from, they arrive in Toronto or Montreal, they stay in a hotel, usually for a few days, then they are transferred to other cities across the country where they are met by the resettlement agencies which work to find permanent housing, language training, and other things for those refugees as quickly as possible.
Very quickly.
Okay, I can tell the minister this. The families that I've met, they've had appointments set up 3 weeks after they've arrived with an immigration officer. The officer doesn't show up. They don't know when they're coming. In terms of resettlement, one hotel at least, whereas there were 37 families, 10 of them are remaining, and they've been here since December in the same hotel. 12 has been moved with 1 hour's notice to another hotel. The other folks who have found permanent housing, that was done actually by volunteers who are helping. So I wonder if I can have a further discussion with the minister, perhaps not at this time, to see how we can address some of these issues.
It is true. I said 52% of refugees who have arrived have found permanent housing. The percentage is below that in Vancouver. So Vancouver does seem to have certain issues that other cities do not have. For Vancouver, the number is 31%. So I acknowledge there are issues in Vancouver, and I or my staff would be happy to discuss them with you. And if you have specific cases, then bring those to my attention.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Tabaran, I understand you'll be splitting your time with Mr. Chen.
Correct. Minister, first of all, on behalf of myself and all the refugees and asylum seekers and all those service providers and dedicated healthcare professionals in the field, I want to thank you for restoring the interim federal health program. Canadians were ashamed of the previous government's petty actions in denying health care to refugees. Our actions has restored the pride we take in our national generosity. There's lots more work to do. In particular, I'm referring to the infamous Bill C-24, as you just mentioned, which created a two-class citizenship. One class for those born here and another class for those who choose Canada as their home and earn their Canadian citizenship. Minister, how soon can we expect the government to introduce legislation to repeal the provisions of Bill C-24?
Coming days, and not very many, is my answer to when we will introduce C-24. In terms of interim federal health program, we really had no choice but to repeal it. I'm glad the Conservatives have found a new commitment to the Charter, but their own interim federal health program is entirely inconsistent with the Charter when the judge said that it constituted cruel and unusual punishment and was therefore unconstitutional and contrary to the Charter. So we had no choice but to get rid of it for that reason, but we wanted to anyway, because we think it's only right that refugees receive health care. It was economically ridiculous for the federal government to save some money, only for the provincial governments to have to spend more money. So net, it cost taxpayers money. It was unconstitutional, and it's certainly the right thing to do to provide health care. And finally, on the subject of the charter, clearly the Interfederal Health Program was unconstitutional. We now have concern that the designated countries of origin, which the Conservatives set up, may also be unconstitutional. The discrimination between refugees in terms of what kind of appeal you may have, there have been some court cases. So as a result of that charter uncertainty, we are actually reconsidering whether to keep the designated countries of origin at all. In the election, we committed to setting up an independent panel to determine which countries should be on that list. But now, in light of court challenges to the constitutionality of designated countries of origin in the first place, we may even remove them, and in which case we would not need any outside body to advise on which countries, because we wouldn't have any designated countries of origin. So this is something which is charter related, and we've been talking about charter, so I raise it, on which we have not yet come to a decision. But the whole issue of designated country of origins clearly does raise charter issues which we are reviewing now.
Mr. Chen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my understanding, Minister, that your ministry is coordinating with governments at the provincial and municipal level to facilitate the settlement of 25,000 Syrian refugees. Can you explain how those responsibilities are being divided among the various levels of government in collaboration with the federal government?
Yes, I'm delighted to. And to say I'm collaborating with them is an understatement. I've spoken several times to every one of my provincial counterparts, and collectively they oversubscribe to the 25,000, which means there's a lot of enthusiasm at the provincial level. I've spoken to more than 30 mayors, all of whom expressed enthusiasm. So all are participating in one way or another. But I think there's also a key group in there that is vital, which is the settlement agencies. And they are working through the federal government, but with all levels of government. And they, in a sense, are the driving force for the settlement. But as we get into things like healthcare, schooling, language training is partly financed by the federal government, but a lot of those things are more in the provincial area. But the federal government is coordinating on a day-by-day basis through its Government Operations Center, where we have provincial people embedded. So we are coordinating daily with our counterparts from other levels of government. But the settlement agencies, which are not government, also play a crucial role.
Chen, you may proceed.
Just to tag on as well to my colleague's question around Bill C-24, I know that under the previous government, the language requirements were made extremely challenging for new immigrants that are applying to become Canadian citizens. And I know that in my riding of Scarborough North, which has one of the highest populations of new immigrants, it's extremely challenging for families who are sponsoring grandparents or parents to be able to have them successfully transition to Canadian citizenship. How will you and your ministry address this system to make it more inclusive with respect to the strict language proficiency requirements that are currently in place as a result of the last government?
Okay, that's a really good question, and I said it was coming in days and not very many days, so I don't want to say exactly what we're doing today, because it will be not many days before we do say that. But I would say I hear you on the language issue, but I would also say there's two sides on this debate. On the one hand, one does want to be inclusive, one does not want to impose unreasonable language tests on people. On the other hand, one does also want to recognize that it is important in order for immigrants to settle well, to integrate, to prosper in Canada. It certainly helps if you can speak English or French. So we have to find a balance between those two elements, and we seek to achieve that balance in the bill that we will be presenting in a small number of days.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. Rempel, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions will be directed to Ms. Tapley. Ms. Tapley, is it my understanding? It's my understanding that you serve in the role of Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Program Policy at the Strategic Program Policy Sector at Citizenship and Immigration Canada. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Excellent. Ms. Tapley, it's my understanding that the government in their campaign platform said that they will immediately lift the Mexican visa requirement. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Ms. Tapley, it's my understanding that thus far a review, a formal visa review conducted by technical experts in the public service of the Mexican visa situation has not yet been conducted. Is that correct?
Go ahead.
That's correct.
Ms. Tapley, then in that situation, it's my understanding that if a decision has been made without undergoing this particular review, that we would be making a policy decision that has not yet had public service review, which would look at the quantitative and qualitative indicators that are used to determine a country's eligibility for a visa exemption. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, although a formal visa policy review for Mexico has not been officially launched, it doesn't mean that we haven't done a considerable amount of work with respect to Mexico and the issues around the visa. So much of that work is underway. These are discussions that we are having with the minister at the moment, and it would be inappropriate for me to comment further on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Tapley, do technical experts in the public service believe that the Mexican passport is a reliable indicator of identity and nationality?
I think maybe that's enough.
I think so too.
We've come to a consensus that that's enough questions from Ms. Tapley.
Mr. Chair, point of order. Point of order, Mr. Chair. Bosch and O'Brien on page 1068 says that witnesses must answer all questions which the committee put to them. The motion here states that department officials were invited to this committee. Witnesses are sworn in, and I've asked a question. I don't believe that the witnesses get to determine when a member is answered a question or not.
Mr. Chair, we'll bow to that authority, and Ms. Tapley will continue to answer the questions.
Thank you, and you were correct.
Thank you. So I'll ask the question again. Do Canadian technical experts in the public service believe that the Mexican passport is a reliable indicator of identity and nationality?
We believe that the Mexican passport is indeed a reliable indicator of nationality. Doesn't mean that we don't, that there may not be some other issues with that, but certainly we would respect Mexico's sovereignty in issuing those documents, absolutely.
Also for Ms. Tapley, do Canadian technical experts in the public service believe that Mexico's border management practices, for example, tools and measures in place to manage external borders and prevent illegal migration, indicate an acceptable risk for a visa exemption or an unacceptable level of risk?
There are a number of issues that we are under discussion within the department, with other departments, and with the government of Mexico, Mr. Chair, and those are issues that we are discussing with the minister at the moment.
What issues have been raised so far in these discussions?
There are a number of issues with respect to our own asylum system and issues around that, and other issues with respect to some things that the honourable member has raised.
Does Ms. Tapley believe that these issues provide a conflict with the Liberal campaign commitment to immediately, using the word immediately, lift the Mexican visa requirement?
Those are issues that we are discussing with the minister at the moment.
For Ms. Tapley, do Canadian technical experts in the public service believe that there are weaknesses in screening and enforcement measures at Mexican ports of entry?
I think that would be inappropriate for me to comment on, Mr. Chair.
I'm surprised that, Mr. Chair, that one of our senior public servants wouldn't want to comment on this, given that the minister is here to discuss his mandate letter and the commitment to immediately lift the Mexican visa requirement is clearly in there. But I'll continue. Does Canadian assessments of security matters in Mexico, including particularly organized crime, drug cartels, indicate an acceptable level of risk for a visa exemption or an unacceptable level of risk?
Mr. Chair, these are issues that we are considering in terms of our advice to the minister and what we provide to the minister at the moment.
Thank you. And your time is up, Ms.
you.
Rimpel. And Mr. Asasi, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you ever so much, Minister, for appearing before this committee. I'm sure I speak on behalf of many Canadians in congratulating you for the energy that you had brought to the task at hand. It has been incredible to see your approach to incoming refugees from Syria, to restoring health benefits to refugees, and also for your comments today that we will be seeing changes to Bill C-24. I'm sure that everyone on this committee will agree that that the Canada we have today is really the result of the entrepreneurial spirit of many who have come here to live their lives. Immigration is critical to job creation and economic growth for the middle class. The fact is that Canada needs immigration to maintain our population levels, and we do have an aging population, and Canadians are obviously living longer lives. So given all of that, despite all the foregoing, Canadians are deeply concerned that during the past decade, application processing times for various streams of the immigration system ballooned, as you alluded in your opening comments. To illustrate the point, the processing time for citizenship applications doubled over the past decade. And to take another example, and this is something that I know you attach a lot of significance to, since 2007, family reunification processing times are up 70% for spouses and children, and an even more staggering 500% for parents and grandparents. So given your invitation that this committee assist in seeing how those timelines can be streamlined, I was wondering if, after having had your consultations with senior civil servants in your department, if you could provide us with your early initial impressions as to how the system can be improved. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that question. And in terms of your opening preamble, thank you for what you said. But I would also echo that for so many of you. I know Mr. Sassi's been active with large numbers of Armenian refugees, and others around the table have as well. So it really has been a major collective effort. And of course, I'd be happy to come back at any time. I said at the beginning, we want to be open with all Canadians on the ups and downs of this process and what we're doing, and don't want to hide things, and that it certainly includes, at or near the top of the list, this committee. So if the committee wants me to come back to talk about progress in this area or about any other thing, I'd be happy to return.
Thank you. Well, as you know, the Prime Minister's mandate letter specifies the need to develop a plan to reduce application processing times for sponsorship, for citizenship, and for visas. So have you had a time to examine these issues?
Well, I've spent a certain amount of time on the refugee issue, but I have certainly spent considerable time on this issue, yes, because as I said, there are many important things to do, but if I had to say what was the top priority for me over the next, let's say, 2 or 3 years, it would be to bring down these processing times for family members. And so we have spoken to experts, we have looked at the figures, I've received briefings about how they got to where they are, and ways in which this might be addressed. But we still have a lot of work to do in terms of the nuts and bolts of how we can address this. Now, partly it's through additional funding to hire more officials who then can interview more people, to let more in, but also it's reforming the way we do our business. I think we learned from the Syrian refugee experience that if you put your mind to it, if you have a very ambitious target that you have to reach, that the human mind can figure out new ways to do things. We can do things concurrently instead of consecutively. We can find ways to alleviate, shorten processes without increasing risk. We had a major role for the military on the health processing. So I think there are a lot of innovative things we can do in order to reduce the time it takes to process a given immigrant. And the more that time can be reduced, the more immigrants can be processed with a given input of manpower, human power. So a lot of our work will be in that area, consulting, I hope, this committee, who can in turn consult your own experts, consulting our own expert advisors, and most importantly, consulting my department, because I think you would agree that the members of my department and other departments certainly rose to the challenge on the refugees. It wasn't always smooth sailing. We had our ups and downs, but it does appear we'll hit our 25,000 target in just a few days. And so they have done a fantastic job there, and with that experience behind them, I think they can do another fantastic job on this second and equally important issue, which is to reduce the processing times for family class members. But I hasten to add, very quickly, that you don't change a battleship overnight, that this will take a number of years to achieve major change in this area.
Thank you.
Minister, I'd like to thank you and your officials for appearing before the Parliamentary Committee on Citizenship and Immigration today. And as your mandate letter states, that we will have an ongoing and continuing engagement with Parliamentary Committee, and we look forward to progress reports on a regular basis from you. Thank you so much. The committee will now suspend for 2 minutes. Thank you. And move in camera.
you.